All right, I think we have allowed enough time for people to join in. I'm sure we'll have some stragglers, but they'll just have to catch up. I want to welcome everybody. I hope you're in the right place. We are here to discuss the state of cybersecurity for medical devices and healthcare systems. This is connected to a report that put out by Finite State, Securin, and the Health ISAC. Hopefully you are familiar with all those organizations, but I'm going to introduce you to our panelists and they who represent them. And hopefully we will be able to engage in some really interesting discourse about the findings from that report. Let me start with introductions, and I'll begin with Phil Englert, who is the Vice President of Medical Device Security for the Health ISAC. He has been working with the Health ISAC works with medical device manufacturers and medical delivery organizations to improve privacy and security in practical and achievable ways. Phil himself brings over 30 years of technical and operational leadership in the healthcare and life sciences and brings to this discussion an extensive knowledge of healthcare and medical device technologies. Kiran Chiniganagari is the co-founder, chief product and technology officer at Securin. All right, we'll get started again with Kiran, who is the co-founder and chief product and technology officer at Securin. Securin is a leading provider of tech-enabled cybersecurity solutions, and Securin works with hundreds of customers worldwide helping them gain resilience against emerging threats. Kiran himself has decades of experience in technology and product security specifically, and will help us unpack some of the information from the report itself. Larry Pesci is the Product Security and Research Analysis Director at Finite State. Finite State is the leader in helping organizations reduce application security and product security risk across the software supply chain. Larry is anything but typical in this space. He is a longtime instructor with the SANS Institute and even longer time co-host of Paul's weekly security podcast. He likes to spend his work time and his spare time tearing apart IoT devices looking for vulnerabilities. And he has spent a lot of years focusing those fearsome habits on medical devices. So I think he will be able to bring some very interesting perspective to our discussion today. I am Eric Greenwald, your host and moderator. I am the general counsel for Finite State. I am not at all sure how that qualifies me to be the host here, but we're going to roll with it. So let me give you a quick rundown of what we hope to accomplish in today's session. So first, we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the state of the industry that is impacted by the results of this study. Then we'll turn to looking at some of the key findings from the study itself and talking about their significance, focusing in particular on the vulnerabilities that it found that are weaponized and that constitute advanced exploits. We will then move on to talk a little bit about the FDA's 524B regulation that is actually being implemented or within days, and some of the implications that it has for the industry, and kind of mesh those developments together with the findings from the report. Then we'll talk a little bit about the future outlook and collective action that can be taken to try to address some of the concerns arising from the information in the report. And we'll turn to our Q&A session. And we plan to turn to that Q&A session pretty early on. We're not just going to reserve the last 10 minutes or so. We're planning on devoting a fair amount of time today to that Q&A session. So please do submit questions through the chat thread to let us know if there are any questions that you have that you want us to address. And we will do our best to get to all questions, unless there's a ton of them, in which case we'll get the ones that seem to be the most relevant to the participants. So what I want to do is I want to first turn to Phil Englert to talk a little bit about what's happening in the industry. And Phil, let me just sort of pose a pretty open-ended question for you based on your experience and expertise in medical device cybersecurity. What is your assessment of the current state of the industry? And in particular, I want to hear your thoughts about what the most pressing vulnerabilities are, an assessment of the readiness of healthcare providers and manufacturers to tackle the challenges associated with those vulnerabilities, and any significant or transformative changes that you think are necessary in order for the industry to have a more secure future, the security that it needs in order to be able to perform its functions.
Sure. And thanks, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and speak to your audience. Healthcare continues to evolve, and it's an amazing thing to watch. But what we're really seeing is the interoperability continues to expand rapidly, right? The threat surface increases along with that interoperability. So, and that's driven by a number of things. The blended products, right, where we've got medical devices that are now connecting to the cloud, and we're storing things in the cloud, managing it. Uh, Analyzing it and then sending it down to caregivers, right? We also have increased pressure for external performance and utilization monitoring by manufacturers. So all of these, interoperabilities, all of these boundaries have to be, managed and protected. And that's a difficult thing to do, not only because of the technology, but also because of all of the relationships that this creates, between caregivers, of different capabilities, between manufacturers of different capabilities, between technologies that are different as well. So these are huge, and healthcare is really an information-driven industry. The data-driven or the data generated by medical devices drives clinical performance, drives clinical decision making, right? In a hospital, right? Um, Patient decisions rely 90% on clinical diagnostic analysis, right? And these are pretty amazing. The other thing that we're seeing in healthcare, right, is this technology advances extends the capability of clinical staff. So we have fewer, let's say, eyes on glass, if you will, right? There's not the monitoring systems in the ORs or in the ICUs give us the ability to extend, one nurse, what used to be for every two patients, now we've got one nurse for every 5, 6, maybe even 7 patients. And telemonitoring is extending that even further, right? So now we've got, a centralized monitoring that's off-site, looking at not just, 10 or 30 patients, right? They may be looking at 4 or 5 different healthcare providers, right, on this. In the clinical lab, we've seen, technicians that used to operate machines, right? And that transforms to, this is more akin to an automobile assembly line than the technical, chemistry analysis of days gone by, right?
Yeah.
So, which is incredible, right? Now we're running hundreds of thousands of assays on a daily basis. And we see this over and over again, whether it's higher throughput through diagnostic imaging, whether it's, a physician using augmented reality, to discreetly define, the space between the L2 and L3 vertebrae while doing neurosurgery, and not just guessing based on how it feels between your fingers. So all of this advancement is a marvelous thing, but with it comes, as I said, a larger threat surface, more technologies that have to integrate with each other that may not do so natively, right? And that it creates challenges for everybody, for the manufacturers, for the healthcare providers alike.
It's really interesting. I mean, I think it surprises no one that technology is playing an outsized role in medical care. It's fascinating to hear about what what the industry is able to do with the integration of technology, and I think that's part of what has made the threat of cybersecurity attacks so scary, that we do rely upon this technology in extraordinary ways, not partly for the actual scientific advances, partly for efficiencies gained and the ability to extend care far out beyond where its reaches have traditionally been. And this report, and Kieran, I want to turn to you to talk a little bit about some of the numbers, because the numbers are startling. It's not unique for an industry security report, whether in the healthcare sector or elsewhere, to say vulnerabilities are growing, remote control exploit risk is growing. So what I wanted to give you the opportunity to do was unpack the results a little bit, the numbers specifically, and say what we can draw from these. And I don't want to say belittle the notion that, oh, big numbers, they come everywhere, you shouldn't be scared. But I want to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about why people should be concerned about these numbers, what is at their root and what they mean.
Absolutely. And this number should be concerning, Eric. The number of breaches, if you look at the data from the Office for Civil Rights from Health and Human Services, right, they've been tracking it for years. And if you look at the data from 2009 to till date, there have been, number of breaches, 5,000 plus breaches, right? And these are linked to healthcare providers, business associates, and EMR data, and a whole bunch of it, right? And the 90% of these 5,000 plus breaches could be attributed to two: healthcare providers and business associates. Like Phil was talking about, how interconnected these devices are. Moving the data to the cloud, and being able to do a lot of amazing stuff with these new devices, right? Is increasing, right? So if you unpack that number, if you dig deeper, right, what you will see is that out of the 5,000 plus breaches, 85% of them are caused by hacking or unauthorized access, predominantly due to ransomware attacks, right? And where is this happening? On network servers. And how is it happening? By using the software applications that are residing on these servers, right? So you have a nice funnel. You can start to, kind of visualize, right? You have software applications that are sitting on a network, servers, right? And these servers are being constantly attacked by ransomware groups, and whether you use remote code execution or whatnot, right? And then, these devices are sitting at healthcare providers, right? And business associate places, right? So it still doesn't paint the picture of why the number of vulnerabilities are on the rise, right? So I would go back to what Phil was saying, right? There are more and more devices that are being brought online. There are more and more devices that are interconnected, right? What is doing is there is increasing complexity, and the attack surface is increasing, right? So the expansion of the attack surface is providing opportunities for bad actors, right? For ransomware groups or APT groups, to exploit those vulnerabilities. Because as devices become more and more connected to the internet or to the networks, right, they become potential entry points for attackers. The other reason we are seeing a lot of these increase in the attacks, or the number of, it's like, legacy systems. A lot of these hospitals and clinics and care providers use legacy systems, and they have outdated software, right? So they don't have the modern protections that we would like to see. And these predate, a lot of these, technology that relies on this legacy platform predate security best practices. So that is also contributing, to this increase in the number of, threats, the increase in the number of breaches, the increase in the number of hacks and whatnot, and all of it.
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's not only in the healthcare sector where there's legacy code to worry about. I think probably the OT, or the industrial control system sector, is where you probably have the biggest concerns about that legacy code. But it's important to know that it exists in the medical sector as well. So I wanted to ask and turn to Larry about the fact that the report highlights vulnerabilities that are identified as weaponized, and to talk a little bit about what that means, and differentiate a little bit, from the non-weaponized, or the vulnerabilities that have not been identified as weaponized, and what it means that there are 160 instances in the report identified as weaponized vulnerabilities.
Right. So yeah. So Eric, to talk about some of those differences, that absolutely we're going to see some vulnerabilities that maybe don't have public exploits or public proof of concept, or some actor using those on the internet that we were not observed. But based on the data from that we gathered, that there was significantly higher this year of those vulnerabilities that were identified that do have that proof of concept code, that do have the ability to be executed upon and used for remote code execution, and ultimately compromise. And I think a lot of these come out of not necessarily a specific target for any of the healthcare vertical and any of their tangential systems. I think it comes a lot of that out of research against just the computing industry as a whole, and that healthcare happens to be using many of these same components, which now, arguably for ransomware actors and so forth, becomes a crime of opportunity.
Right.
So yeah, and it kind of makes sense when we're starting to think about a more and more connected world, whether it be through healthcare or industrial control systems, that we're going to start finding more and more vulnerabilities, and we're going to start finding more and more of those that are going to be exploitable until we see some fundamental changes.
Well, and let me, Phil, let me turn back to you because, obviously, as I mentioned towards the top, there's a lot of concern, a lot of fear around the possibility of whether it's health organizations or medical devices being attacked using the technology. Um, and as Larry was saying, a lot of the vulnerabilities are common across many technology platforms that exist in many different sectors. So how big of a target is the medical sector? We haven't seen too many attacks directed at medical devices, but we have seen certainly ransomware directed at hospitals. They seem to be a pretty prime target for that. Can you talk a little bit about how much of a risk, how much of a target the medical sector is for malicious actors?
Yeah, so actually it's a cross between what Kieran had said and what Larry had said, right? It's exactly right that these devices, we're not making less secure medical devices today than we were yesterday, right? In fact, they're more secure. Manufacturers are stepping up, right? But at the same time, we've been monitoring, the medical device networks with passive monitoring tools, and we're learning more about the components that are in there. And once we know what these components are, we can then associate those vulnerabilities of those components, with these medical devices. And I think that is driving one of the increases, right? But back to Kieran's point, right? We have folks that are coming in looking for ways to attack and monetize, right? Healthcare, right? And when they see medical devices, to Larry's point, right? There's what they see is a Windows box or a Linux box on the end of the wire. They cannot necessarily discern that it's, the control station for the MRI or the CT, right?
Right.
So then they're attacking these, and what we're seeing is, and we saw this in Germany, right, where the hackers got in, they crippled the ability to do diagnostic imaging at a trauma center, right? And they were then on divert, right, causing somebody in a critical care situation to be delayed treatment, right? And so that's the impact that we're having. Ransomware actors are locking up medical devices because they don't recognize that they are medical devices, right? Causing interruptions in the ability to deliver care. And we saw this not only in Germany, this happened in Alabama, right, with that infant death and the TOCO monitoring system in the labor and delivery department, right? And we'll see this over and over again. So again, we're not seeing attacks on medical devices per se. We don't have, folks going after the vice president's pacemaker, right? But we are seeing incidental and accidental, and perhaps it's purposeful, but we're seeing, interruptions in the ability to deliver patient care. And this will get more and more common, at the same time, we're getting better. One of the things that I noted in this report, right, from what was a few years ago, we were looking at diagnostic imaging stations, right, MRIs, CTs, X-ray machines. Those aren't included in this report, right, which tells me that we've responded. We learned, we responded, we corrected, right? And as we discover more vulnerabilities, to Larry's point, in devices that are present, and we find compensating controls or patches and fixes for them, that those will go away and there'll be a new attack vector, and it'll take us to work through that. Remember, the FDA has about 560 product codes for software enabled medical devices. That's out of 63, 6,800 product codes, from tongue depressors and scapulas to CTs and PET scanners, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of technology that we'll work through experientially.
I want to, we're already starting to get some questions in, which is great, and I want to get to them very soon. But what I want to do quickly is, because Phil, you mentioned hospitals being an economic target. I think when people paint the nightmare scenario about medical devices, their minds tend to focus on medical devices. And, remote code exploit of a pacemaker is probably the quintessential example. And, but as the report highlights, the vulnerabilities found were predominantly in software systems, not in medical devices, though there are plenty of medical device vulnerabilities. I wanted to turn to Larry, but Kieran, also interested if you have anything to chime in on, to talk a little bit about the remote code exploit and privilege escalation exploit findings from the report, and what they actually mean, whether those are, medical devices, software, both, essentially equal opportunity exploits, and what is there in there that people should really take away from the report?
Sure, and Karen, if you don't mind, if I kind of get a little follow on to some of Phil's comments as well to tie some of these together, and absolutely the report does consider both devices and the ancillary systems and so forth. And to Phil's point that our adversaries, our bad actors, are definitely monetizing this type of stuff. And we think back in the day that an attacker would get a 0-day and they'd launch it against a hospital with the intent to potentially damage the vice president's pacemaker or those types of things. But the attackers have very much realized that no, using it to earn some money and ransomware and stuff is much more valuable to them than to do those other sort of damaging types of attacks. So I think that's part of the reason why we have not yet seen as many attacks against the medical devices themselves as opposed to some of the other systems. I'd also arguably throw a little bit of the politics in there, in that in some of our EPT groups, while they may absolutely have the capabilities to do remote code execution on some of these medical devices that could potentially kill someone, I think that that might actually be, quote, a declaration of some sort of cyber war, and so they tend to steer away from that as to sort of keep the status quo, and and move down those types of things. Real quick before I let Kieran loose, and Phil, to your comments, I've seen some of the absolute opposite, where some of our actors have gone into healthcare, certainly during COVID, when they compromised a hospital, they did a bunch of ransomware attacks, and then they went, "Oh, this was a hospital. Sorry. Here's all of your unlock codes. You're the customer here, so we're going to release you from this because we understand you're doing a really hard job, and it was never our intent." Like, they had some weird code of ethics where hospitals were sort of off the table and they did it by accident.
I agree with Larry and Phil comment. I think, these bad actors or attackers do have some ethics and some moral code, that they're not hacking hospitals deliberately, right? They cannot discern that, the device on the other end is a medical device, right? They're just thinking it's a Linux or a Windows machine, right? And that's what is, and it's attractive target, especially RC and P, right? It's so attractive because you can use it, to get significant control over a compromised system, right? Once you get access to that one system, they can move laterally, right? They can do escalation of privileges. They can get unauthorized access to other systems in the network, right? And then, cause, ransomware or breach or, loss of data, whatever that is, right? And the other thing is, what we are seeing is, there is a increase or growing sophistication in these cyber criminals, right? Attackers, they're using, sophisticated, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, right? To, go against these devices, like Phil said, right? It's not that we are less secure today, right? I think, these devices, or hospitals have more security measures, like, more precautionary measures. They're doing a lot more than, last year or previous year and all of it. But the sophistication is also increasing. It could be also be what we're seeing, some of it is also AI, right? It helps both bad guys and, good guys. Bad guys are absolutely taking advantage of these, new generation AI skills, to launch sophisticated attacks, against different. And the thing that we're also seeing is, once it is infected, right, it causes a lot of damage, right? And Phil was talking about, death, of an infant, right? We're seeing a lot of these happening, right? Not so much as the deaths, but more of, disruption of services, right? Hospitals not being able to provide care, patient care, that they need. It will cause disruption or surgeries or whatnot and all of it.
And I'll add in from my own experience, since Larry was talking a little bit about APTs and targeting medical devices. My part of my background is I was the deputy director of operations at Cyber Command, and the general view is that while nation state actors absolutely have developed capabilities that they could use to do remote code execution on medical devices, they don't really have a reason to use it. They're mostly developing those for their own intelligence gathering or military preparation purposes, and I just don't think they see much to be gained in actually executing code against those sorts of devices. But what I want to do, we're going to turn in a moment to the FDA and their 524B authority. But before we leave this general topic area, I wanted to bring in a question from the audience. And I think it probably makes most sense to direct this towards Larry, but either Phil or Kieran could also chime in. The question was, what suggestions do you have around SBOM generation and monitoring? I presume to try to address concerns about healthcare security of healthcare devices and systems. So Larry, can you jump in on that for a moment?
Sure. I happen to know a bunch of folks that do SBOM stuff, so yeah, it does make a little bit of sense. So SBOM generation, I think for the HDOs, you're really largely going to be getting your SBOMs from your device manufacturers, and then needing to find a way to keep up to date when those SBOMs change, whether it be based on version or because the security industry is dynamic, that one day we have 12 CVEs and then tomorrow we have 14 CVEs, which arguably should change some of that VEX VDR data associated with those SBOMs. So it is very much an evolving sort of situation for each one of those. Right now, it's kind of hard. And we joked on the Security Weekly podcast last night about how do folks currently get SBOMs from their manufacturers. Many of them are, oh yeah, and I'll email it to you. And that's not a great solution. So I think some of these solutions are still sort of evolving. However, if you do have the ability to do some of this stuff yourself, and I heard this quote from Mikko Hipponen from F-Secure the other day, and it was that regardless of what company you work for and what vertical, you're a software development company. So if you're developing some software of some variety, you should be generating and cataloging your own SBOMs and feeding those into some vulnerability monitoring programs.
I want to use the SBOM as a way to jump into the FDA question, but Phil, I wanted to direct to you a question, and it looks like you have something specific to say, so feel free to interject that before you get to my question. But I wanted to ask, it seems like even though the FDA is mandating SBOMs for medical device manufacturers, but it seems like the industry, both in the medical vertical and in others, are sort of rallying around SBOMs as the tool du jour for purposes of providing transparency and supply chain security. What are you seeing in the industry with respect to gravitation towards SBOMs? Oh, you're muted, Phil.
Yeah, sorry there. So yeah, it's a train coming down the tracks. As a matter of fact, the FDA dropped the final pre-market guidance for cybersecurity and medical devices 2 days ago, right? And it came out yesterday was its official publication or issue date, right? And in there, I was really two things really caught my eye that I think are pertinent to this. And one is that the SBOMs must contain, right, must include manufacturer developed code, which in the 524B in the omnibus, where they talked about commercially available and open source code only, right? Not the proprietary stuff. So I was glad to see that the FDA put that in there. They also put in a clause that said manufacturers should make SBOMs available to their customers on a continuous basis, and to Larry's point, in a machine readable format, right? So those are going to be important, right? SBOMs are really just an asset management tool, right? You've got a device that is comprised of 100 or even thousands of software components, right? And so the SBOM tells you what those components are and what the dependencies of those components are on other elements. Very important, right? Remember Log4j, right? For a healthcare organization that might have 1,200 different makes and models of medical devices produced by 300 to 500 different manufacturers, it's a huge and time consuming, and resource drain task to ask every one of those manufacturers, are your devices or any of your devices impacted by this vulnerability, right? So that's an important element to have. This automation should help quite a bit, and it should make this scalable, right? It's not the holy grail of transparency, but it's a good way to go there. The other thing that I would recommend to healthcare organizations, right, is to look through what that pre-market guidance says. It indicates a number of uh, artifacts, that will help with transparency, from threat models to risk assessments to mitigation strategies, and if healthcare consumers, if the healthcare providers are asking for this, right, and the manufacturers have developed, a public facing, if you will, document that will explain this, right, we're going to really close the gap in here quite a bit.
I want to just quickly turn to Kieran to see if he has anything to add on the SBOM front.
Yeah, so one of the things I would say is, SBOM and more recently HBOM, right? CISA just released the guidance around, hardware bill of materials too, right? Both should be treated as a way to proactively secure, devices, right? Whether medical devices or, software or any of it, right? So one of the, to answer Jesse's question, what suggestions do you have around SBOM generation, right? Pick a framework, right? There is a competing standard like Cyclone DX and SPDX. A lot of time there is this war of, which one do I go, right? And they're not doing it, right? And I think, this is going to happen for the next few years. So pick a standard and go with it. It doesn't matter. There is an interoperability both between SPDX and Cyclone DX. So I think don't wait on a standard to be the one that is going to be something everybody use. I don't think it's like C++ and Java or C#, right? This is going to happen. Pick one. That's what one thing I want to tell all the audience, that, pick one and move on.
So hey, Eric, real quick, if I can just have a shameless plug for Health ISAC. We are getting ready to launch an SBOM repository where manufacturers can upload their SBOMs and make them available to member healthcare delivery organizations. The goal here is to do two things: enable, the smaller, let's say less prepared, less mature manufacturers, give them a vehicle that's easy to use and a low resource constraint, right? And then make that available on a broad basis to all healthcare delivery organizations in a safe and secure manner. So we're super excited about that, and we can't wait to see, to watch the industry response and participation in this area.
That is great. I'm going to turn back to you in a second to talk a little bit more about 524B authority. But before I do, I want to get to another very interesting participant question that kind of tees right off of that. The question is, if the manufacturer is not providing an SBOM, is it ethical to extract firmware and generate one? And here I'll exercise moderator's privilege again and offer some of my own knowledge that, first of all, from a business perspective, and what I would say is there is growing pressure, and individual companies can put that pressure on their suppliers to say, you need to give us an SBOM. If you don't, we're going somewhere else. And this is obviously especially true in the medical device manufacturing arena, where FDA is now requiring them. But I'll continue to answer the question. Let's say the manufacturer still isn't. There aren't just potential ethical issues, but legal ones involved in trying to extract firmware and generate an SBOM, because it involves conducting reverse engineering of the software. And for the most part, manufacturers impose licensing restrictions on their software or hardware that says no reverse engineering. Now, I will note that the Department of Justice has said that, hey, if you are engaging in legitimate security research, that we're not going to prosecute you for criminal violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act if you engage in unauthorized reverse engineering, for example. But there are still civil components to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act where you could get sued by the manufacturer for doing the reverse engineering if it's prohibited by the licensing agreement. So what I would say is consult your lawyer, but go the business route first, and try to see if you can apply what should be already ample and growing pressure to generate SBOMs from medical device software developers. So Larry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, so I was going to make the joke that despite Eric being legal counsel and a lawyer, you should not construe that as legal advice for your environment. That you should consult your own.
Right.
But the other one that I wanted to add too, that extracting firmware and generating software bill of materials from that is a completely different beast than what you would normally find in traditional SBOM generation tools, because traditional SBOM generation is SCA, or source code analysis, and source code dependency. Whereas when you have a firmware, you're dealing with a lot of binary files as opposed to source code. And for plug for finite state, that is absolutely where we excel, and the market leader for binary source code analysis, by taking those binaries and performing that track back as to what constituent components built those individual binaries to generate more accurate software bill of materials.
Larry, I'm going to take the opportunity to give you the chance to say a little bit more because as we talked about prior to this webinar, you wanted to talk a little bit about the 524B toolkit that Finite State is developing that I think fits precisely in with what you were just describing. So feel free to extend your shameless plug a little bit farther.
Absolutely. So yes, absolutely. Finite State is developing, and I will affectionately refer to it as the easy button for compiling all of the documentation for your 524B submissions. We excel at software bill of material generations and that binary SCA, which is a component of those submissions, including the need for risk assessments, penetration testing, plans for remediation, and all those types of things. So we're developing the ability for you to collect all of that data together, so that you can effectively click the easy button and have all of that data ready to be submitted to the FDA in sort of a single pane of glass type of option. I'd also argue that as part of our SBOM generation for some of that firmware and the improved accuracy from the binary part, is that traditional is a shift left at time of build using source code analysis and so forth. But when you're submitting the final, you're likely using both first and third party code, and some of that maybe you're not getting from your upstream, or you don't know all of the details from the upstream, or maybe even have some surprises from what your developers have pulled in outside of your development practices. So shifting left and shifting right is very, very valuable here. So source code analysis, binary source code analysis, giving a more accurate picture to give more accurate landscape for what you're submitting for the FDA, and being more accurate for what's vulnerable and how you choose to address it.
Excellent, thank you. And so Phil, I finally want to circle back to you to talk a little bit more about at a macro level 524B authority and what it means in the healthcare space to the medical device manufacturing sector, and we can then talk a little bit about how it might be implemented.
So yeah. before we step away, just to circle back on Larry's comment, right?
Yeah.
Be very cautious about generating your own SBOMs. Different tools will give you different results, and they may not be reliable, right? So items in the mirror may be larger than they appear. So
Yeah,
caution
Phil.
there.
Phil. We just saw a release today from Deepbits about some of their analysis and a couple of different software generation tools. SBOM generation tools for SCA, and that some of them were incomplete or some of them were different.
Right,
Yeah,
right. So coming back to the 524B, Larry, right? So the 524, the omnibus bill, right, gave HHS, right, statutory authority over cybersecurity, right? So it's not just the FDA, but the FDA is under HHS and probably the most forward looking, right, around cybersecurity department that the government has. I shouldn't say that, but they're doing a great job. So anyway, but 524 for the first time gave them statutory authority, right, over that. Prior to that, the FDA mission was safety, right? So only when, a cyber security flaw or a vulnerability had a safety impact did the FDA have statutory authority to step in. So there was this gray space that they knew that they should be in, but they couldn't be really there, right? This is the 524 gave them that, and it had 4 key components, right? It said that the device's security must be foundational in product development, right? It must be developed in a secure product development lifecycle, right? They must have a post-marketing plan, right? They must make patches and updates available, and they must provide a software bill of materials, right? So that was as far as they went. The 524 also did it for new submissions, right? And this is a key, right? Because legacy devices, all of these older medical devices, and it's interesting, right? We talk about legacy like it's a horrendous problem in healthcare, and we talk about 7 or 15-year life cycles, right? And maybe longer as we're running out. But if you go into manufacturing, if you build an OT environment, you're talking 30 years minimum, right? And if you go to space, it's 50 or 60 years, right? So legacy means different things to different industries, right? And we have to be clear that what we're talking about there. But so my point is the new submissions have to do this, right? One of the things that's clear though, and medical devices are constantly being updated and modified, new features, new this and that. And a lot of medical devices get pushed through the FDA on what's called a clinical equivalence, right? So what they mean by that is if this device is equivalent to that device, we can use the data for the first device to support and reduce the burden of providing that data on the second device. For cybersecurity, what the FDA has said is that if your substantially equivalent device had not gone through a cybersecurity review, your submission will, right? So you've got to do the full gamut on there. And so the substantial equivalence kind of gets negated on the cybersecurity side, which means that some of these legacy devices will have to be addressed, right? The interesting thing is many of them, right, haven't been addressed because they can't be addressed. They're built on such old technology that it's going to be very difficult. And what we'll see is a new generation of technologies that are, built with security from the ground up, and that's going to make a game changer. But it will take a while for that to work through the ecosystem of healthcare.
So thanks, Phil. And what I'd like to do is take a question that came from earlier on that was more general, asking about tips for implementing and improving vulnerability monitoring program, and morph it into a question for Kieran that's a little bit more applicable to 524B. So tips that you might give for implementing programs that will help companies work within the framework that the 524B authority is setting up.
Yep, for sure. Let me answer a little bit more broadly first, right? So when you look at a vulnerability monitoring program, right? First and foremost is you want to have a good understanding of what your attack surface is, right? Inside and outside. What are the different, because a lot of times what we see is organizations don't have a good inventory right? So that's the first and foremost. Second is, now you need to start looking at, okay, I have these assets, what are my threats and what are my exposures, right? And the way you do it is, once you bring the data, whether it is from scanners or from external attack surface management programs, right? Don't look at data purely from NVD. The reason for that is NVD does not have a threat context. Again, I'll put my shameless plugin for security here, right? Use a threat context here, right? So which of these vulnerabilities have a threat? Is it ransomware? Is there a APT group? Is it trending in, is there a discussion in deep and dark web? Larry talked about, is there a proof of concept? Is there an exploit code? Is there a discussion happening around deep and dark web around that vulnerability, right? So those are the things you want to consider, because you cannot focus on all the vulnerabilities and fix every single one of them. Use that asset criticality, right? How critical is this particular asset, right? Is it used in surgery, right? Is it running Windows and Linux, right? And is it having a particular CV that is being exploited by ransomware group, right? So bring the threat context into it and then start prioritization, right? So that's what the other one I would say is don't do this on a one-off basis. So now always look at doing on a continuous basis, because the attack surface is changing on a daily basis. Phil talked about, early on the webinar, like more and more organizations are leveraging cloud. And we saw this uptick in the usage of cloud, especially around COVID time, right? And when you use cloud, like a lot of these systems are ephemeral, right? So what you see today may not be the same attack surface tomorrow, right? So that's something I would do. And also I would look at, doing a pen testing, complement your vulnerability management program with your pen testing, right? You want to do this at least once a year, if not, once every quarter at pen testing, right? Again, shameless plug for Securin. We can help you both with your pen testing. We also can help you with your vulnerability and external attack surface management. And then a little bit of plugin for Finite too, right? Use the data, right? The Finite has done an amazing job at producing the information around any of the firmware, right? So they can help you with the SBOM analysis and all of it. Use that as a as a threat intel or a feed into your management program.
Excellent. So what I think I want to do, we've got just a little bit more than 10 minutes left, and I kind of want to shift to our last phase, which is call to action. And I want to give each of the participants an opportunity to say a little bit. I anticipate that most of the folks who are attending this webinar are concerned about what they need to do, what are the best things that they can do, what the industry can do to try to address the vulnerabilities that are highlighted in the report, the broader concerns about security, the business concerns associated with all of the compliance that needs to be done in the healthcare industry. And I want to give the participants an opportunity to talk a little bit about, high level guidance. What should the people who are listening to this webinar be doing? But I want to make that, something of a discussion. I want participants to still be putting in questions if they've gotten either about the broad topic, or if anything that any of the participants say sparks a particular question, to go ahead and throw it in there. But I think I want to just start with Larry to talk a little bit about the practical side of call to action. If you were giving advice to a company, whether it's a hospital, a related healthcare industry, a medical device manufacturer, and they're concerned about addressing the vulnerabilities that they have in their own systems, the dependencies that they have on other entities, producers. How should they go about doing this? Again, sort of at a macro level, but feel free to dig in the details if it seems appropriate. Larry, you're muted.
Thanks. And unfortunately, I hadn't said anything witty yet or smart. So I think I'll stick to the high level, and I think one of the things that Kieran just touched on was it really becomes about the data and how you apply it. If you're in an HDO, hospital, you name it, and you're using devices, you're like you are, there's going to be a lot of data available to you through software bill of materials, through output from 524B. You're going to be able to get more and more data about the vulnerabilities in the devices, you're going to get data about how to resolve those ultimately from the manufacturers as part of some of our new devices and some of the legacy ones that Phil is sort of led us down that path. So it becomes about how you do that data management and how you choose to act upon it in your environments to do better, to analyze your devices to verify they're present, to restrict various network segments where these are present from even having an attacker be able to get to those network segments, and so forth. Similar type of thing on the device manufacturer. You've got a lot of data. You're dealing with individual components building up your applications, your devices, and that data those components can be all correlated to individual vulnerabilities at the time that you're using them, so that maybe you need to shift your development your development efforts to swap some of those out for newer, and educating those teams about when that makes sense, and integrating those into your software development lifecycle.
So Kieran, Phil, anything to add on to what Larry was saying, or different form of call to action that you want to offer up?
Phil, why don't you go first?
Sure, thanks, Karen. So I'll do the HDO and the MDM side, right? So first for the MDM, right? What we're really talking about is reestablishing the trust, right? From a safety perspective, healthcare delivery organizations, intuitively trust the manufacturers for that. If there's a safety issue, they're like, hey, the manufacturer's got it, I'm good with that, right? When it came to cybersecurity, the manufacturers didn't quite know what to do. And so they broke that trust, right? Because they hid behind a wall of, you can't do that, we can't do that, the FDA doesn't allow that, right? And so now we've got to get back to the transparency that creates a true partnership and reestablishes that trust, right? So that's going to happen from a number of different ways, right? From analyzing, being truthful and being transparent about the weaknesses in your system, and helping healthcare organizations understand what they can do, right? If they don't have a control built into the device, what's a compensating control that can help protect the healthcare environment, right, from that, right? The other thing that needs to happen is healthcare needs to look at this from a business resilience perspective, right? Too often we're chasing vulnerabilities. And I'll tell you, chasing vulnerabilities is like killing flies, right? You kill one and 10 show up to the funeral. It's a no-win situation. What we're really talking about is the ability to continue to deliver healthcare after we've had an event, right? So what does it mean? What devices are most important to healthcare delivery? And it's different for every department within a hospital. A CT that supports a trauma center, right, will put a hospital on divert when it goes down. And when a hospital is on divert, they're missing 16 to 18% of their admits that come through the emergency department. That same CT might also be in a offsite diagnostic imaging center. And if it goes down, right, and it does when we lose a tube or have some other normal failure that's not cyber related, right, it's an inconvenience to patients, right? We either delay the diagnostic study by a period of time, or we send them to some other location, right? So the same device can have different impacts depending on where in the healthcare delivery stream it lies, right? So each department is its own little specialty group. It's why they're so different. So you have to ask yourself, if I don't have, which equipment, if I didn't have for 3 or 4 days, would cause me to shut down my department? And that's where you spend your cycles trying to figure out, how can cyber make this device fail? How can I recover from that and restore those essential clinical services, right? I don't have to worry about every infusion pump. I've got 64% more in my hospital inventory than I actually am utilizing at any one time. So if a few infusion pumps go down, which they do from, again, normal failure, if they go down from cyber, you just have to say, all right, how do we contain that, limit it to the number, and keep this business up and running? And I think that's the key here, is being responsible.
Kieran, anything to add?
I'd say, Phil has put it so much eloquent. I was going to say the same thing, but I agree with his, take. Like, it's a whack-a-mole approach. If you go after vulnerabilities, it's a losing proposition. You'll never win, right? Yeah, well, I would agree 100% with Phil. It's all about cyber resilience, right? It's what you do after the ransomware attack happens, right? Or that breach happens, right? Again, look at the asset criticality, inventory, and then the criticality of the asset, right? Categorize them and say that these are tier one, assets that I need to protect them at any given point of time. And if something were to happen, what's my backup measure, right? Will I be able to restore my data? Will I be able to restore my device to, its condition where it was, right? Maybe not 100%, if 80% of my operations can be up and running, right? So that cyber resilience is very, very important. A lot of organizations are focused so much on putting controls, like compensating controls, updates, which is important, like don't take me wrong, but they're not focusing enough on the aftermath of something were to happen. And I would say that, that's a really important area where organizations have to put, time and effort in.
Excellent. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a very quick wrap up. And I'll start by saying, summarizing what I think I heard in the call to action. And that is, there are some key technical steps that you can take. That resilience is absolutely fundamental to whatever it is you're trying to do in this industry. Not that resilience is unimportant in other sectors, but the key question is, when do you get back to providing healthcare after attack? And also that this field is incredibly varied, incredibly complicated, and that there is no easy button. That it's going to require for any provider, any manufacturer, any company that is working in and around this sector, providing healthcare, that it's complicated, and it's going to involve some work and effort and allocation of resources to try to address the concerns and build up that resiliency. With that, I want to thank all of our participants. I wanted to note one question that somebody offered about being able to access the recording for this, and a link with the recording of this webinar will be sent to all folks who register for this. And what I'd also like to do is, if we can go to the last slide, just let everybody know what all the folks who are participating here. And their contact information, and also to make sure that you have heard all of the complexities here and the ways in which these various organizations can assist, whether it's a specific company or sector wide, everybody in trying to try to resolve the complicated and difficult issues that we've got presenting in the medical industry. So with that, Phil, Kieran, Larry, thank you very much. And also thank you to all of our audience members who joined us today. That's it. Please let us know if you have any questions.